Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to get right to business because we have a lot of joint work to celebrate today. Thank you, Ms. Porter. Today, we'll be joined by the Council's Committee on Public Safety and Justice, chaired by Councilmember Charles Allen. Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Members, including Councilmember Che and Councilmember Anita Bonds. Please give them a round of applause. We are also joined by members of my administration, and Councilmember David Grasso. Thank you, Councilmember Grasso. We are joined by members of my administration and a very persistent and focused community of advocates and supporters to advance the law in the District of Columbia. Let me acknowledge our Director of Victim Services and Justice Grants, Michelle Garcia, who you will hear from shortly. Our Director for Women's Policy and Initiatives, Jennifer Porter. Thank you, Jennifer. I would also like to acknowledge the commissioners from the D.C. Women's Commission who are present. Thank you, commissioners. Jennifer Smith, who is the Director of Forensic Sciences in the district. Chief Peter Newsham, who is the police chief. Commander Leslie Parsons, who helps us investigate major crimes in the district as well, as our Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice. So the Sexual Assault Victims' Rights Amendment Act of 2019, we frequently refer to as SAVRA 2.0. And I want to thank every advocate in the room who is focused with us on how to update the law. Every advocate, every victim, and every survivor, and all the community-based organizations that work with us on this legislation. When I first introduced SAVRA in 2017, we were focused on reducing violence, sexual violence, and improving outcomes for survivors. Over time, conversations with victims, survivors, and advocates have helped us find ways to build on those original goals and better align the legislation with our DC values. And in January of this year, after much collaboration, we introduced SAVRA 2019. And this legislation expands the rights to an advocate, codifies rights of teenage victims, and requires additional training for advocates working with youth victims, and expands membership of the sexual response team. We know that we all took a lot of time to make sure that we got it right and a lot of persistence, but I am grateful to everyone who worked with us to develop, improve, and pass this legislation. By passing and signing SAVRA, we are sending the clear message to survivors of sexual assault. Your voices matter, your stories will be heard, and your advocacy will continue to improve the lives of people in our city. So I want to now invite Director Garcia, who is going to be followed by Marissa Light. We'll have some time for some questions and signing the bill. Director Garcia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Mayor Bowser, for your unwavering commitment to reduce sexual violence and improve outcomes for survivors in the District of Columbia. 5 years ago, the district embarked on a critical analysis of our responses to sexual violence with the goal of improving those responses. Today is the culmination of those efforts. This could not have been possible without the unwavering and tireless work of many individuals and organizations, many of whom I'm thrilled to see here today. I'd like to specifically thank our partners at DFS and MPD for their work, and also Councilmember Allen and his staff for moving this bill through council and all of your collaboration. I also want to recognize Elizabeth Olds, the SAVRA independent consultant, and and all the members of the SAVRA task force upon whose recommendations this legislation has been built. Throughout our work on SAVRA, we were committed to centering the experiences and the voices of victims and survivors. And I'd like to thank the DC Justice for Survivors campaign in their efforts for ensuring that survivors' perspectives were included in and for ensuring the passage of SAVRA 2019. I'd like to introduce Marisa Ferrai-Light, who is co-lead organizer and a founding member of the DC Justice for Survivors campaign.
Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to be here today after several years of advocacy for the rights of sexual assault survivors in our community, and to witness the signing of legislation that has been crafted with survivor voice at the forefront. My name is Marisa Ferrai-Light, and I'm the co-lead organizer and one of the founding members of the DC Justice for Survivors campaign, also known as DCJSC. DCJSC is a grassroots coalition of sexual assault survivors and allies that are committed to seeing that survivors in our community are treated with dignity and respect by those in positions of aiding us, whether that be medical professionals, social service providers, or members of the criminal justice system. DCJSC was founded in 2013 in response to a Human Rights Watch report that shone a light on the difficulties and sometimes even trauma that many survivors faced, specifically in reporting this crime to police. And our advocacy helped secure passage of the first Sexual Assault Victims' Rights Amendment Act in 2014. SAVRA 2014 was a really important step forward as it gave adult survivors that went directly to police or sought forensic exams at one district hospital the right to a SAVRA advocate, if they wished, to help guide them through the process of seeking services and or a law enforcement response. Nearly all of the survivors that gave input into that bill painted a picture for policymakers of the potentially traumatizing effects of having to navigate a confusing and stressful process alone in a time of great crisis, and their wishes that future survivors in the district not face the same situation. We also spoke about how having an advocate is even more critical for those experiencing an assault as teenagers or belonging to groups that are marginalized in some or in multiple ways. We were elated when SAVRA 2014 codified the right to an advocate for at least some of the survivors in our community. However, we all knew that there was more work to be done. SAVRA 2014 didn't account for providing an advocate to survivors that went to hospitals other than Washington Hospital Center, and it only applied to adults. And the advocate program as it initially existed would not have been able to meet the increased demand alone. There was also recognition that justice for survivors doesn't look the same for everyone, and that not everyone that experiences a sexual assault wants to engage with the criminal justice system. Those that do are frequently disappointed to learn that a prosecution is not guaranteed or even likely, even when the survivor is willing to testify in the case. Additionally, we recognize that most survivors seeking assistance do so long after the 96-hour period in which an evidence-seeking forensic exam is a viable option. The rights of SAVRA 2014 were not going to be enough. For more than a year, key stakeholders came together to grapple with these issues, explore what is being done in other jurisdictions and with regard to similar crimes, and to learn from the experiences of those most directly impacted by this legislation. For an even longer period, there were dialogues and debates about what would be best for survivors as the language of SAVRA 2019 took shape. All of these efforts were aided tremendously by the work of an independent expert consultant, a position specifically created in the law to gather data and work with all the system stakeholders, included survivors. And I, too, would like to specifically recognize and thank the work of Elizabeth Olds today for ensuring that a multitude of community groups had a seat at the table and for recognizing the expertise that comes from lived experience with these issues. SAVRA 2019 wouldn't be the strong legislation it is without all of these perspectives being considered, challenged, and ultimately supported with the evidence that gives us the confidence that we're doing the right thing. I'm enormously proud to have been a part of this process and grateful for the many survivors that have been brave and generous in sharing their very personal experiences with us and with policymakers. I hope that playing a role in the development of public policy to benefit survivors has been an empowering experience and played even a small role in regaining the voice that was taken from us as a result of an assault. We can and should celebrate this milestone today. But once again, there's more work to be done. The law is the articulation of these rights, but now the really hard work of implementation must begin. We at the DC Justice for Survivors campaign are confident in the commitment and abilities of those mandated to carry this out, and have appreciated that our district leaders have consistently sought and welcomed survivor voice in this process. The DC Justice for Survivors campaign looks forward to this next phase in improving the district's response to sexual assault, and believes we can be a model for other jurisdictions around the country in ensuring that the pathways to assistance are accessible, equitable, and uphold the dignity of those seeking it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're going to go to the bill signing. If I could invite the members of the council, or directors, but before we do that, I want to acknowledge Monica Palacio, who somehow I missed sitting in the front row, who is the director of our Office of Human Rights. And I like to say Monica's agency is the teeth behind DC values and making sure that we can enforce our human rights law, our robust human rights law in Washington, D.C. So the members of the council, directors, members of our advocacy groups, Ms. Olds, please join me. Questions, we'll go on topic, and I'll make myself available for off-topic questions to my left when we're done. Any press questions on topic? Yes. Sure. The question was, who do the mandates apply to? Okay, I'm going to ask Director Garcia to say a few things about that.
There are multiple elements to the legislation that put requirements on different entities. So most broadly, it expands a victim's right to an advocate. So that means in any interactions with law enforcement at any time during a hospital visit, they have that right to an advocate. So the implementation will ensure that MPD is making victims aware of that, notifying them of those rights, and then connecting them with those advocates. There's also provisions in the bill around testing of what we call PERCs, or physical evidence recovery kits, commonly referred to as rape kits. So there's some elements for DFS in there. And then there's requirements around community-based organizations who are going to be providing sexual assault counseling or advocacy services, and the training elements required for someone to be able to provide those services in the district.
So, is there a mandate that the hospitals must employ the advocates, or is it that the hospitals must make the advocates available so they can request it?
Yes, the hospitals do not need to employ the advocates. The advocates will be employees or contractors of community-based organizations, and when victims present at the hospital, they will be given the opportunity to have an advocate provide services to them. Yes.
Mayor, can I ask you and the Chief, the genesis of this legislation, was this a situation where this need was commonly known and it took the legislative, the executive, and the law enforcement entities to come together on this, or is this something that just recently has been enacted because of recent situations?
And I would say that we all recognized, and I can't see you, but That we all recognize that we needed to update the law, and frequently all of our agency directors, the police chief included, is charged with making sure our law is keeping up with what we see on the streets, what we hear from our victims' communities, what we hear from members of the council. And so we recognize that we had a gap in services, and that's what this law aims to fill. Any community questions?
Chief, could you add that?
I'd be happy to talk about it. So I mean, the mayor hit the nail on the head when she talked about it. The handling of sexual assault investigations by the police department has evolved dramatically over the course of the two SAVR legislations. And really what it is, it's a victim-focused approach. We had heard prior to that some pretty horrible stories of sexual assault survivors who had been mistreated and re-victimized by the system. And as I heard up here already said today, I think the District of Columbia, after the implementation of this legislation, is going to stand out as one of the cities in the country, if not the best city in the country, with the progressive way that we handle sexual assault investigations.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And then we'll set up down here in 1 second. And if there are additional pictures that we want to take, we can make time to take those. Angela, Michelle. Okay.